Tourist detained at UK airport. The arrival that went wrong. He thought the hardest part was over. The passport was valid. The ticket was booked. The hotel reservation was confirmed. His travel insurance certificate was printed. Everything looked perfect. Everything looked safe. And honestly, Daniel felt excited. Very excited. For years he had dreamed about visiting the United Kingdom, London, Manchester, Liverpool, Edinburgh. Places he had seen in documentaries, places he had seen in movies, places he had promised himself he would visit one day. Now, he was finally here. The flight had landed. The journey was complete. Or at least, that was what he believed. Most travelers imagine the airport is the end of the difficult part. They believe once the plane lands, everything becomes easy. But experienced travelers understand something important. Landing is not entry. Landing is only arrival. Entry happens later, at immigration. And immigration decisions can change everything. Daniel joined the queue. Hundreds of travelers stood ahead. Hundreds more stood behind. Everyone holding passports. Everyone carrying expectations. Everyone hoping for a smooth entry. The atmosphere felt normal, calm, routine, professional. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing seemed dangerous. Daniel reviewed his documents again. Passport, hotel booking, return flight, travel insurance. Everything appeared organized. Everything appeared correct. He felt prepared. Very prepared. Minutes later, he reached the immigration desk. A border officer greeted him politely. The passport was scanned. The officer looked at the screen, then looked at Daniel, then looked back at the screen. The questions began. Simple questions. Normal questions. Questions asked every day. What is the purpose of your visit? Tourism. How long will you stay? 2 weeks. Where will you stay? Daniel provided the hotel information. Everything seemed fine. The officer continued typing. Then another question arrived. What do you do for work? Daniel answered honestly. The officer nodded. Everything still appeared normal. Then something unexpected happened. The officer paused. Only briefly, but long enough to change the atmosphere. Long enough to make Daniel nervous. The officer asked another question. Then another. Then another. The conversation became more detailed. Much more detailed. Most travelers never realize this. Immigration officers are trained to identify inconsistencies. Small inconsistencies. Large inconsistencies. Anything unusual. Anything that creates doubt. That is their job. And sometimes, a routine interview becomes something more serious. Daniel felt uncomfortable. Not because he was hiding anything, because the questions were becoming increasingly specific. The officer asked about his itinerary, then his accommodation, then his employment, then his finances. Everything seemed more intense now, more formal, more serious. Other travelers were moving through immigration quickly. Daniel remained standing, answering questions, waiting, watching, wondering. The real problem started later. The officer asked to see proof of accommodation. Daniel immediately showed the reservation. The officer reviewed it carefully, then carefully reviewed it again. Something seemed wrong. Something seemed unusual. Daniel could not understand why. The reservation looked valid. The confirmation looked genuine. Everything appeared correct. Yet the officer continued examining details. Minutes passed. The atmosphere changed again. The officer stood up. And then came the moment Daniel would never forget. The officer said something unexpected. Please come with me. 4 simple words. 4 words that instantly changed everything. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. His heart accelerated. Questions filled his mind. Had he done something wrong? Was there a mistake? Was there a problem with the reservation? Was there a problem with his documents? He had no answers, only uncertainty. Most travelers never experience this moment, but those who do often describe the same feeling: confusion, fear, stress, and complete uncertainty. Daniel followed the officer through a secure door, away from the public area, away from the immigration counters, away from the arriving passengers. Everything suddenly felt different. The room was quiet, very quiet. Several other travelers sat waiting. Nobody appeared relaxed. Nobody appeared comfortable. Everyone looked concerned. Daniel finally realized something. He had been taken to secondary inspection, a place many travelers never expect to see, a place most tourists never think about, a place where immigration officers conduct additional checks. The officer explained that further questions were necessary. Nothing more, no details, no timeline, no explanation. Just more waiting. And honestly, the waiting felt worse than the questions. Minutes passed slowly, very slowly. Daniel checked the clock repeatedly. The uncertainty became exhausting. Most travelers never realize how stressful uncertainty can become, especially inside an airport, especially inside an immigration facility, especially when nobody explains what happens next. Eventually, another officer arrived. The interview started again. This time, the questions became even more detailed. Questions about finances, questions about accommodation, questions about travel plans, questions about previous international travel, questions about contacts inside the United Kingdom. Everything seemed important. Every answer seemed important. Every detail seemed important. Daniel answered honestly, carefully, respectfully. Yet the officers continued asking questions. The situation felt increasingly serious. Then something shocking happened. One of the officers mentioned an inconsistency, a small inconsistency. A detail Daniel had overlooked completely, a detail he believed was insignificant. But immigration officers viewed it differently, much differently. And honestly, that tiny detail would become the reason everything changed. The nightmare was only beginning. The question that changed everything. Daniel sat quietly inside the secondary inspection area. Minutes felt like hours. Every sound seemed louder. Every passing officer increased his anxiety. The room felt different from the main terminal, more serious, more controlled, more intimidating. Most travelers never expect to see this side of an airport. They imagine arrival gates, taxi queues, hotel check-ins, not secondary inspection rooms, not immigration interviews, not detention concerns. And honestly, Daniel was beginning to panic. The first officer returned. A file rested in his hand. The officer sat down calmly, professional, respectful, but serious, very serious. The questioning continued. "What is the purpose of your visit?" Daniel answered again. "Tourism." The officer nodded. Then another question arrived. "How do you know the person listed in this address?" Daniel froze. Only briefly, but long enough. The officer noticed. The address in Daniel's travel documents belonged to a hotel. At least that was what Daniel believed. But immigration checks had revealed something unexpected. The reservation information appeared inconsistent. The hotel booking confirmation contained details that did not fully match the accommodation records. A small discrepancy, a tiny detail, something most travelers would never notice. But immigration officers notice details. That is their job. Daniel suddenly understood the problem. The reservation had been made through a third-party website. One section listed a hotel name. Another section listed an accommodation provider. The documents looked confusing. Nothing fraudulent, nothing illegal, just confusing. Unfortunately, confusion creates questions. Questions create concern. Concern creates delays. Most travelers never realize this. Immigration officers do not know you personally. They only know your documents. Your documents tell your story. If that story appears inconsistent, more questions follow. The real problem started later. The officer asked for proof of funds. Daniel immediately showed bank statements. Savings existed. Enough money existed. Everything appeared legitimate. Yet the questions continued. The officers wanted to understand the trip completely. Accommodation, finances, employment, travel history, everything. Most tourists never experience this level of scrutiny, but some do, especially when inconsistencies appear. Daniel remained cooperative, honest, patient, yet stress continued growing, because nobody could tell him what would happen next. Would he enter the country? Would he be refused entry? Would he be sent home? Nobody explained. Nobody promised anything. The uncertainty felt overwhelming. Hours passed. The airport outside continued operating normally. Passengers arrived. Passengers departed. Flights landed. Flights left. Meanwhile, Daniel remained inside the inspection area, waiting, wondering, worrying. Most travelers underestimate the emotional impact of immigration uncertainty. especially when travel plans are already underway. Hotel bookings, transportation reservations, vacation days, travel budgets. Everything depends on one decision, one immigration decision. That reality felt frightening. Then another officer arrived, a different officer. The questions changed direction. This time the focus shifted toward employment, income, future plans, travel intentions. Again, Daniel answered honestly. Again, he remained cooperative. Yet the questions continued. Everything seemed important. Every answer seemed analyzed. Every detail seemed reviewed. And honestly, Daniel began questioning himself. Had he forgotten something? Had he misunderstood something? Had he submitted incorrect information? The pressure became exhausting. Most travelers believe detention means criminal behavior. That is not always true. Sometimes additional questioning occurs because officers need clarification. Sometimes documents create uncertainty. Sometimes information requires verification. That distinction matters, very much. Yet while sitting inside that room, logic becomes difficult. Fear becomes easier. Daniel imagined worst-case scenarios: missing the vacation, losing hotel payments, paying for new flights, explaining everything to family, explaining everything to friends. The financial consequences suddenly felt real, very real. International travel is expensive. Flights cost money. Hotels cost money. Insurance costs money. Transportation costs money. Unexpected immigration problems can make those costs even worse. Daniel understood that now. Hours after arriving in the United Kingdom, he still had not officially entered the country. That realization felt surreal. Most travelers walk directly from immigration toward baggage claim. Daniel remained stuck in uncertainty. Then something unexpected happened. One officer returned with additional information. The accommodation issue had finally been clarified. The booking itself appeared legitimate, but the confusion had triggered concern. Concern that required verification. Verification that required time. And time created stress. The officers continued reviewing details, but the atmosphere slowly changed. The tension decreased slightly. The questions became less aggressive, less frequent, more procedural. Daniel noticed the difference immediately. Hope returned. Only a little, but enough. Most travelers never realize how quickly emotions change during immigration situations. One moment fear dominates everything. The next moment relief appears. Then uncertainty returns again. The cycle continues. And honestly, it can be exhausting. Daniel learned something important during those hours. Preparation matters. Not just preparation, clear preparation. Documents should tell one consistent story. Accommodation details should be easy to understand. Travel plans should make sense. Financial records should support the trip. Everything should align. Because immigration officers evaluate credibility, not assumptions, not intentions. Credibility. That lesson became unforgettable. Yet the final decision still had not arrived. The officers still needed to decide. Would Daniel enter the United Kingdom? Or would his trip end before it even began? And honestly, what happened next would become the most emotional moment of the entire experience. The decision. Daniel sat silently. The clock continued moving. The waiting continued. And honestly, he felt exhausted. Not physically, mentally, emotionally. The uncertainty had become overwhelming. Hours earlier, he imagined arriving at his hotel, exploring London, taking photographs, starting his vacation. Instead, he remained inside an immigration holding area, answering questions, waiting for answers, watching officers move through the room. Everything felt unreal. Most travelers never experience this. Most travelers never realize how quickly a normal arrival can become a stressful situation. One misunderstanding, one inconsistency, one concern, and suddenly, everything changes. Daniel understood that now, better than ever. The door opened. Another officer entered, a senior officer. The atmosphere changed immediately. Several documents rested inside a file folder. Daniel noticed his passport, his travel records, his accommodation documents. Everything appeared inside that file. The officer sat down, calm, professional, serious. The room became silent, very silent. Daniel focused on every movement, every expression, every word. The officer finally spoke. "Thank you for your patience." A simple sentence, yet it felt important, very important. Then another sentence followed. "We have completed our review." Daniel's heart accelerated immediately. Everything now depended on the next few words. Everything. The officer continued. We needed clarification regarding your accommodation arrangements and travel plans. Daniel nodded, carefully, respectfully. The officer reviewed several notes, then looked directly at him, and finally delivered the decision. Daniel would be admitted into the United Kingdom. For a moment he thought he misunderstood. The stress had been so intense. The uncertainty had lasted so long. That positive news felt difficult to process, but it was real. The nightmare was over, at least the immigration nightmare. Relief arrived instantly, powerfully, unexpectedly. Daniel thanked the officers, collected his passport, collected his documents, and finally left the inspection area. The airport looked completely different now, not because it had changed, because he had changed. The experience had changed him. Most travelers see airports as transportation hubs. Daniel now saw them differently, as places where preparation matters, as places where details matter, as places where assumptions can become expensive mistakes. The financial reality quickly became obvious. Several hours had been lost. Transportation plans needed adjustment. Hotel check-in times changed. Reservations required updates. Everything became more complicated. Fortunately, the consequences remained manageable. But Daniel understood something important. The outcome could have been very different. Had the inconsistencies remained unresolved, entry might have been refused. That would have created much larger problems. Flight changes, accommodation losses, additional travel expenses, potential immigration complications. Everything could have become far more expensive. Most travelers never consider these possibilities until they become personal. That is why preparation matters. Preparation reduces risk. Preparation reduces confusion. Preparation reduces unnecessary attention. Daniel eventually reached his hotel. The vacation continued. The city remained beautiful. The attractions remained exciting. The trip still became memorable. Yet one memory remained stronger than everything else: the airport interview. Because that experience taught lessons no travel guide had ever explained. Lessons every traveler should understand. First, documents tell your story. Immigration officers do not know you personally. They know your paperwork, your reservations, your travel plans, your answers. Everything contributes to credibility. Second, consistency matters. Accommodation details should match. Travel dates should match. Financial information should support the trip. Everything should align. Third, small mistakes can create large consequences. Most travelers focus on major problems. Sometimes small inconsistencies create the biggest delays. Fourth, honesty matters, always. Providing accurate information remains essential, during every application, during every interview, during every interaction. Fifth, preparation creates confidence, not guarantees, confidence. And confidence helps during stressful situations. Daniel often reflected on the experience afterward, not with anger, not with resentment, with understanding. Because immigration officers have responsibilities, travelers have responsibilities. Both sides operate within systems designed to verify information. That reality became clearer over time. Most travelers only see the result: approved, denied, admitted, refused. But behind those decisions exists a process built around verification. And verification depends on information, reliable information, consistent information, complete information. That is why preparation matters so much. Imagine two travelers. Both arrive at the same airport. Both intend to visit the same country. One traveler has organized documents, clear reservations, consistent travel plans. The other traveler has confusing information, missing details, contradictory documents. Which traveler creates confidence? Which traveler creates questions? The answer is obvious, and honestly, that comparison explains many immigration outcomes. The strongest travelers are often the best prepared travelers, not the richest, not the most experienced, the best prepared. That lesson extends beyond the United Kingdom, beyond Europe, beyond international travel itself. Preparation improves outcomes everywhere. Travel becomes smoother, problems become smaller, stress becomes more manageable. Everything benefits. Daniel's story is not about fear, it is about awareness. Because awareness creates smarter travelers, awareness creates better decisions, awareness creates stronger preparation, and stronger preparation creates better experiences. Before your next international trip, ask yourself one important question. If an immigration officer reviewed every detail of my journey today, would everything make sense? Because that answer matters, more than many travelers realize. Airports are not only places of arrival, they are places of verification. and verification rewards preparation. Travel should create memories, not panic, not confusion, not unnecessary stress. That is why understanding travel requirements matters. That is why understanding immigration procedures matters. And that is why stories like this deserve attention. Because one unexpected question can teach lessons that last a lifetime. UK Airport Travel Safety Checklist. Carry valid travel documents. Keep hotel reservations accessible. Keep return flight information available. Understand your travel itinerary. Carry proof of sufficient funds when appropriate. Maintain travel insurance documentation. Ensure all travel details are consistent. Answer questions honestly and clearly. Remain calm during immigration interviews. Verify information before departure. Because preparation remains one of the most valuable travel tools available. Disclaimer. This story is presented for educational and travel awareness purposes only. Immigration procedures, border control practices, entry requirements, traveler rights, and inspection processes vary by country, airport, and individual circumstances. Travelers should always consult official government sources and comply with all applicable immigration laws and regulations before traveling. Subscribe to Global Policy Guide for travel safety, visa updates, immigration awareness, travel insurance education, airport realities, and real travel risk stories from around the world.